The other thing about the school, Shroom, that I have to mention is this is this very fortuitous kind of encounter I had with people called Irish Christian Brothers. When these were monks who belonged to Ireland, and they came to, I'm not really sure what order they belonged to. They were known as Irish Christian Brothers. And they came to India. Of course, they were posted to India as teachers of English. And the school was run by them for many years. And during my till I was in class, I joined that school in class 5. So
what was the school called, sir? Do you remember?
I'll need to check the pronunciation because I know only the Malayalam pronunciation. It's Aloysius.
Okay.
I'm not sure that's the pronunciation. Let me check it because I owe it to the school.
Saint Aloysius.
Yeah, I owe it to the school. But if I use this pronunciation there, no one will recognize the school. So it still exists. It's more than 100 years old, and it still exists. It's a wonderful school. I don't know what the culture is now, but the facilities still exist that I talked about earlier. Aloysius. Oh my, this is too difficult. The stress is on issues. Aloysius. There is an
Really?
Aloysius. Aloysius.
And all my life I have been saying
Yeah,
Saint
that's-
Aloysius.
Yeah, Aloysius apparently, but with the stress on E. Anyway, yeah, for the first 3 years of my life at the school, it was run by Irish Christian Brothers. Thereafter, I don't know what the reason was, but they handed it over to the local bishop, the Catholic bishop. They were in India for a few more years after that because I corresponded with one of them, who I'll be talking about, for a while after he had left the school. But the lucky thing for me was I could spend about 3 years in their company. And I can't use another word, I have to say company, because I gained so much from that association, Sharon, that I can only ascribe it to some divine luck, which is why I wanted divine luck. That is self-contradictory, isn't it?
Intervention.
Right. Intervention is a better word. That's a better word. That's why I needed the word fortuitous, right? Because they were supposed to be teachers of English, and they did a wonderful job of that. Quite a bit of my teaching style I owe to at least 2 of them. One called Brother Christopher Murphy, the other one called Brother, perhaps Christopher, I'm not sure, O'Keefe, a typical Irish name. But before I talk about their contribution to my intellectual growth, I should talk to them about my fascination, just as the nuns in my earlier school were a bit of a mystery for me. These people, these brothers, were fascinating for their totally un-Indian appearance. Even Sister Rita was very un-Indian, Sister Theophila was very un-Indian, but nuns, most of their skin is colored. It's just the face. But these men, I'm using a terrible expression, there was a lot of them to be seen. And therefore the alienness stood out, right? And that was fascinating. I said, Lord, who are these people? Where are they from? And the cheeks would be so, the word is ruddy, right? And particularly when they turned emotional, all the blood seemed to be gathering in those cheeks, and one just looked at them in fascination. And it wasn't as if they got angry with us or anything. I said when they got emotional, but sometimes, people get impatient. But most of the time, they were the most wonderful people. Um, they had their quirks as well, which was another thing that made them really interesting to me. O'Keefe, for instance, had a very funny way of calling out the names on the attendance thing. Roll, what is it called?
Roll
Roll call. That reminds me of the army. I was trying to avoid it. But he had a very funny way of doing it. He'd say, um, Christopher KJ or whatever, present brother. Matthew Varghese, present brother. Salim KJ, present brother. Balagopal L, absent brother. Good. And that was the instinctive response. Say good. And then he'd pause and say, why? What happened to him? Oh, he has asthma, brother. I was an asthmatic. So I was present on fewer days than and I was absent, you see. But so what happened to him? Asthma, brother. Jolly good. Wonderful. And we have really good. Balagopal being an asthmatic is a good thing. But it was instinctive. And the other person was the one who influenced me immensely, and that was Brother Murphy. There was a third brother who was a more serious kind of brother. He just taught us the book and didn't do much more than that. But again, he was the kindest of people one could interact with. When you have a very alien kind of person, the least you can expect from them is that they'll be kind to you, right? And they won't do things that you expect non-Indians to do, right? So this other brother as well, unfortunately I forget his name because he didn't do anything special that would help us remember his name by. But he was again an extremely kind person, which is true of all these three men. Brother Murphy is the one I have to talk specially about because he was a clown. He would use all his clowning skills to teach us. I was in the 5th standard when I joined that school, and he taught us English in the 5th standard. All his clowning, skills to teach us English. So a very drab government English book. The school followed, for all its Irish Christianness, it followed the very down-to-earth Kerala syllabus. Again, I have so much respect and love for those men. I want to cry when I talk about them. They fully adapted themselves to the local conditions and did what they were meant to do, teach English, which was their language. Which is another thing I benefited from, learning from a native speaker. Can you think of anything better than that? And during those formative years, I had Sister Theophila, Sister Rita, Brother Murphy, Brother O'Keefe, and unfortunately I can't remember his name, brother. All of them speakers of English. Sister Rita may have been Italian, I'm not very sure, but native speakers, all of them, most of them. So Brother Murphy, to come back to him, he was a perfect clown. He made us, and it was just a few of us who came from Sister Rita and company who could speak English. All my classmates, if we were 40 in that class, about 30 of them came from a Malayalam medium primary school. So their English was very deficient then. They could hardly speak, and they most of the time were mimicking me and my convent friends. See, we came from the convent, a few of us. So to be able to communicate with that kind of a learner group, Brother Murphy needed this. No inhibitions at all. He would use this, and he was a fat man. He was a fat man, to use the exact word for that, I'd have to use the word corpulent, really. And for that kind of man to do funny things, to communicate with people who could barely understand the language and who had to be taught that language, that is what laid the philosophy, the base of the philosophy for me. That you learn on your own, but when someone makes it interesting for you. Krashen and company came much later, comprehensible input and all that. Brother Murphy was the original Krashen for me. And with absolutely no theory to back him up, which also tells you a little bit about my not so exalted assessment of theory. I don't have too much value for theory. If it's instinctively, if you put these things into practice, sure, you don't need any Krashens. I like Krashen though because he makes sense, eminent sense. And I'm always reminded of Brother Murphy and company when I watch him on the videos there. And when he himself demonstrate his comprehensible input theory and all that. Brother Murphy instinctively did all those things for us. He went a step ahead. He introduced us also to, it was a kind of carryover from Sister Rita to Brother Murphy. Sister Rita was a pianist, Brother Murphy was a flute player.
Wow.
And he tried to teach us how to play the flute. And at his own expense, I don't know whether they were imported or whether they were brought from another city in India, certainly not from Kollam, where this was happening. He got them from perhaps Mumbai, somewhere else. I'm not sure they came all the way from Ireland, I doubt it. But some of us who wanted to do this, he didn't choose people saying, okay, sing this song for me, let me listen to you and decide whether you are good enough or not. You volunteered. I volunteered. I discovered I was very bad at it. Particularly because some of the others, I remember one of them, Nellai Arumugam, that was his name, Tamil speaker, fellow student. He picked it up so well, and in comparison I'd say, I want to do this, but now what do I do? But doesn't matter, I didn't do much, I didn't go much beyond the preliminary stages of this, but the fact that someone tried to bring it into the curriculum, might be a very formal kind of word, bring it into the learning experience, and he didn't bother to integrate it with English or anything like that. He just taught us extra time when there was free time for us. He'd gather us and play this. And it wasn't the regular flute which you hold sideways. It was an interesting flute which whether it's called flute at all, I'm not sure. Maybe it has another name. But he called it a flute. It's one of those straight, you hold it straight and play into it.
Was it the same one?
Yeah. The other thing Brother Murphy did for us was to teach us italic writing. The slanted writing, slanting towards the right. And this was part of the timetable. Flute playing was not. This was part of the timetable. He would take great trouble to draw 4 lines on the board using an enormously long ruler, wooden ruler. To hold it itself, only Brother Murphy could do that because of his size. Drew 4 lines and painstakingly made those characters on the board. We of course had our 4-line books and we had to copy him. And that is a thing I should thank him for forever. It is again what Bloom would call psychomotor. Right? So Brother Murphy was everything rolled into one. He addressed our head through that book. He addressed our hearts through the flute. He addressed his psychomotor needs through the handwriting. And now I read about how the act of writing helps your cognitive processing. You know, there have been studies where people writing things down with a pen have been compared with people punching keys to put their notes in. And they found out that the act of writing, there is a logical reason for it, which currently I don't remember, is so very useful for the brain to remember, to log memories, etc. that people recommend writing notes rather than, you know, scribbling them using a digital pen or punching them on a keyboard, etc. The digital pen may be an in-between thing because it essentially uses the psychomotor skills. But maybe the tactile feel is also important. I'm not very sure. I have to go back and reread that article, but I found that article fascinating, and I have to again remember Brother Murphy with great respect for trying to build that into my education. And when I talk about education, one of the things you mentioned earlier was you being asked what, in your opinion, is education. For me, education is this Sharu. It's the lack of consciousness that you are learning. Everything was happening completely unconscious for me and my friends. It is the fact that the whole being is benefiting from it. You don't realize it then, but you realize it later through all the different inputs, the Bloomian inputs. It's the fact that these benefits are accruing, not just unconsciously, but also, to use a positive word, in a very interesting way. I might even use the word milieu, all right? Brother Murphy being the center of action, and the wonderfully expansive area of that school, and again the wonderful do what you have to do attitude of the school. That's what I mean when I use the word milieu. Everything was happening unconsciously, everything was happening in a most interesting way, you know, the Krashinian kind of thing, and everything was benefiting the whole being. And that for me is perfect education, where you don't, for one moment, are conscious that you're being educated. You're growing up. Your body is growing up, your mind is growing up, your creativity is growing up, everything is growing up. And Brother Murphy, of course, he with a flute, he didn't impose some Irish tunes on us. He taught us to play Jana Gana Mana and things like that. You know? Very Indian things. And again, that was one of the reasons perhaps I couldn't do it, because it was a kind of Western instrument that I had to be extra inventive to adapt to the Indian music. I never figured out which holes to open, which holes to close. I was half the time looking at Nellai Arumugam trying to find out what he was doing. But again, Brother Murphy didn't for a moment say, you can't play this thing, go away. He just put up with me and a few other people like me, and we had a fun time. The last thing I have to talk about, I mean, there are other things as well. Another thing I have to talk about related to Brother Murphy is his personal interest in just the students under his care. While Brother Akif, who taught us 2 classes later, would say, Balagopala's asthma, very good, right? Brother Murphy, when he found out I was an asthmatic, called me aside in the playground. He wouldn't himself be involved in any games, but he would be there, probably breathing the air and all that. fresh air. It was most of it fresh, unlike these days. But he was there. Um, he would call me aside and say, "You have to do deep breathing, Balagopal. Let me show you." And he showed me, the typical yoga kind of breathing. I don't know whether he got it from any yogic kind of encounter or whether this is just his way of deep breathing. But he showed me how to close one nostril and keep the other one open and breathe a lungful of air in and then count to a certain number, then release it and do the. He spent about 10 minutes showing me how to do it because I was an asthmatic. Yeah, Prem,